That ball's hit deep. Austin Hayes robs it.
You gotta believe.
And he struck him out.
Unity is adversity.
Right center. He tied the game.
Refuse to lose.
20 strikeouts.
United we play. United we win.
And goodbye, home run.
All hits all the time.
We are family.
Next Scherzer double-digit Ks.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
Fun to watch.
Minus 15.
Respect all, fear none.
Into the upper deck.
Intensity is not a curfew.
Oh, mercy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Another Poco bomb.
Hit well. Nick Gonzalez.
Ace is arguably going to have the best stuff we see from any lefty all season.
Not a whole lot you can do to prepare for this guy. He's got his 10th strikeout.
A 3-hit night for Austin, drove in a couple runs.
Yeah, Austin Martin coming back in the lineup, fantastic. I mean, really what you want out of your All-American.
Happy Draft Day and welcome into MASN All Access from our brand new studio in the MASN newsroom. I'm your host, Paul Mancano. Today's show is sponsored by Royal Farms. Something new is landing at Royal Farms on July 1st. Well, tonight begins the shortest MLB draft in the history of the event, but it's an important one for the Baltimore Orioles, who hold the second overall pick. And tonight we're going to take you up until that O selection at number 2. We'll have live reaction and analysis immediately afterwards. So let me introduce you to my co-host, Steve Molesky, who joins us. Steve, is this the strangest draft that you have ever covered, or what?
I've never covered it from our Hunt Valley studios, so that's a little unusual. And 5 rounds is really unusual, Paul. But, you know, it's going to be significant to see after this draft, when the quiet period ends, if the Orioles can recruit some undrafted players, they're going to try to do that. And it's just a big night for the Orioles. I mean, this is exciting. They've only had a pick this high 3 times in the history of the draft since 1965. So we'll know pretty soon who the guy is at number 2.
And of course, that 5-round draft means the Orioles have 6 picks. They have the most bonus pool money available. Do you think this kind of situation is advantageous perhaps for the Orioles? Obviously, no team is coming out of this with a great outlook on with their draft class, but do you think the Orioles might benefit somewhat given that the draft is just 5 rounds?
Well, I think they benefit in that they do have 6 picks, as you said. They're the only team, Paul, in this draft that has 3 of the first 39. So that's a nice edge, too. That does allow some potential flexibility. But even, Paul, if they don't go under slot, over slot, like Mike Elias and Houston did with Carlos Correa in 2012, they still could save some dollars on the number 2 pick. I mean, they could sign the exact guy they want and save $400,000 or $500,000 under slot. It's happened in the last couple of years with the number 2 pick, and still be able to do some things later. So they're positioned pretty well here with 3 of the top 39 picks.
And we're going to break down all the possible guys that the Orioles could take with that number 2 overall pick. First time in franchise history that the Orioles hold that number 2 overall pick. And that spot has produced some great ones since the draft's inception in 1965. For instance, Reggie Jackson, 1966, not bad. He was taken 1 pick after Steve Chilcott, who never played a game in the major leagues. How about Justin Verlander, taken in 2004 with the number 2 overall pick, right after Matt Bush, who pitched for just 3 major league seasons. And 9 years later, the Chicago Cubs took Chris Bryant 2nd overall, following Mark Appel, who was taken by the Houston Astros and is now out of baseball entirely. So sometimes that 2nd overall pick ends up being better than the one before it. Well, the 2019 draft was just 373 days ago. Don't check my math on that. It's probably wrong. In case you forgot, the Orioles held the number 1 overall pick in that draft, and they used it on a certain backstop from the Pacific Northwest.
At
Adley Rutschman is the #1 overall pick, the catcher out of Oregon State.
The complete package, Paul, the offense and defense is there, leadership, makeup off the charts.
It's been a whirlwind, a lot of emotion, but now it's kind of a little sigh of relief right now, so it's been good.
Mental makeup, I think, is a separator with him. He brings leadership qualities, and then the athleticism in the defense. So, it's a total package.
I'm just focusing on what's important and continuing to improve myself and how I go about my business. That's the most important thing, and I think everything else will take care of itself.
Things will be a bit different this year. Instead of 40 rounds, this draft will be just 5, with a total of 160 picks being made. A portion of the draft bonuses will be deferred to 2021 and 2022. And after the draft is done, teams can sign undrafted free agents for up to $20,000 each. Next year's draft could also be affected. The league has the power to shorten the 2021 draft to just 20 rounds total. Well, unlike last year, the Orioles won't get their choice of prospects in this draft. The O's sit behind the Detroit Tigers, who hold the first overall pick. And interestingly, they might go with a first baseman. The reason that's interesting is only 2 first basemen have ever gone first overall in the MLB Draft. Ron Blomberg in 1967 and Adrian Gonzalez in 2000. Both those guys were left-handed. And the Detroit Tigers could make history by taking a right-hander, Spencer Torkelson, from Arizona State. First baseman should never go first in the MLB Draft. Well, almost never. Arizona State's Spencer Torkelson has so much potential, he's forcing teams to reevaluate conventional draft wisdom.
He's such a smooth swinger at the plate.
Torkelson could become just the 3rd first baseman taken with the top pick in draft history.
Another opposite field bomb. Torkelson says, I didn't want to walk anyway.
The California kid smacked 25 homers as a freshman, then 23 as a sophomore.
Another Torkel bomb. How about that?
But Torkelson is more than just a power hitter. The 6'1 junior hit almost .340 in 3 years at ASU.
2-2 pitch, and Torkelson lines it to left, and a sharp single.
Tork will likely get snapped up by the Tigers with the first pick. But if he slides, the O's could be wise to take him. Well, some experts say Torkelson has the best power the draft has seen since Mark Teixeira was taken 5th overall in 2001. Here are Torkelson's stats with the Sun Devils, brought to you by Royal Farms. He hit .337 in 129 games with 54 homers and a career OPS over 1. So what makes Spencer Torkelson worthy of the #1 overall pick is if he is taken by the Detroit Tigers? Let's bring Steve Molesky back into the fold here. Steve, what do you think separates Spencer Torkelson from the pack?
Well, plus power, Paul. He had 25 home runs as a college freshman. He broke Barry Bonds' Arizona State record. It was one off an NCAA record for freshmen. He hit 23 the next year when everybody knew how good he was. He hit 6 this year in 17 games when the season was finally halted. So plus power. Some think he's the best hitter to come along in a number of years. Some think his hitting is similar actually to Adley Rutschman from last year. A difference is Adley's obviously a better defender. Torkelson's probably going to be limited to first base, maybe left field, but that he's a middle of the order bat. That's almost major league ready, some think now. So it's going to be a real surprise if he is not the first pick here shortly.
And of course, he would have to be a premier talent to be a first baseman and go #1 overall, as that has not produced a whole lot of first rounders, that position, in MLB draft history. Well, while Torkelson might be the best power hitter in the draft, many experts peg Vanderbilt's Austin Martin as the best overall hitter in this draft, and it's hard to blame them. Martin hit .392 as a sophomore with the national champion Vanderbilt Commodores, and the infielder is perhaps the most likely option for the Baltimore Orioles with that #2 overall pick, and it makes a whole lot of sense. David Price, Dansby Swanson, Walker Buehler. Vanderbilt head coach Tim Corbin has seen some premier talents come through his program. Austin Martin is one of them.
I feel like he will get there, and I don't think it's going to take him a long period of time. He's a guy that catches on very quick, and he's very confident. This is not a moment or a circumstance that I've ever seen where it becomes too big for the kid.
Martin hit nearly 400 en route to a national championship with the Commodores as a sophomore.
Really what you want out of your All-American, really led the way with 3 hits.
I think his competitiveness certainly permeates through the group. He's a kid that has played at a high level ever since he stepped on campus, which is very unusual.
Martin's power also took off in 2019. His home run total went from 1 to 10 in one season.
I always felt like at some point in time that Austin was going to develop power, and I do think there's going to be another spike in power for him.
But Martin's speed on the base paths might be his best attribute.
He is a very good base runner. He's a base stealer too, but the base running component, this guy can really run the bases. He knows what he's doing.
Martin doesn't have a set defensive position just yet. That's not a bad thing.
He played every position on the field as a freshman with the exception of pitch and catch. And that's every position. Looking at the prospects of a big leaguer, I think he can play second base. I think he can play center field.
Leadership and competitiveness are a must for a top 3 pick. Martin checks those boxes too.
He's just one of those kids that you put him in bigger environments and he plays better and better. And he pushes others around him too.
If the O's are looking for an impact bat and a defensive Swiss Army knife, Martin might be their guy. Martin played mostly third base for Vanderbilt in 2020. While there are questions about his arm, he still has incredibly high upside. Steve, why do you think the Orioles have been connected to Austin Martin so much during this draft process?
Well, you know, Paul, there at times early on in the process, Baseball America ranked him number 1, or at least had him going first in their mock drafts. They're very early ones. And the Athletics' Keith Law ranks him number 1 now. He thinks he's the best player in this draft, gives him a slight lean because he's probably more versatile hitter than Torkelson. He's a guy that they project can hit 300, maybe have a high 300 on base. He went from 1 homer to 10 homers last year as a sophomore, and the power might be emerging. So this is a guy, Paul, with elite bat speed, elite exit velocities, and this year, before they halted the season, he had batted 69 times. He struck out twice. His strikeout rate is 13% for his career. So he makes contact, he gets a lot of hits, he gets a lot of extra base hits, and there are some comps to Bregman that think as he gets into pro ball and really learns his strike zone, matures a little bit, gets smarter, maybe a little bigger, he may grow into even more power. So real attractive player potentially to the Orioles at 2.
Well, he makes a whole lot more sense considering the Detroit Tigers just now took Spencer Torkelson number 1 overall in the draft, and that means that the Orioles are on the clock. Let's talk about some other guys that they might take besides Austin Martin with that number 2 overall pick. Just 1 pitcher was taken in the first 10 picks of the 2019 MLB Draft. That will not be the case this year. The class is loaded with quality college arms. Maybe the best of the bunch is Texas A&M lefty Asa Lacy. He's got big-time potential for a big dude. 6'4" lefties don't grow on trees. They grow in Texas.
Not a whole lot you can do to prepare for this guy. He's got his 10th strikeout in 5 innings.
Texas A&M's Asa Lacy impresses with more than just his height.
Asa's arguably going to have the best stuff we see from any lefty all season.
He is a guy that will get you out. He has just some nasty stuff.
Lacy's 98-mile-per-hour heater and nasty slider devastated the SEC in 2019.
Another strikeout for Asa.
Command was Lacy's biggest issue with the Aggies. The lefty hit or walked 56 batters in his sophomore season. But Lacy's ridiculous 130 strikeouts could make the big man the top pitcher off the board in the draft.
He has been a monster on the mound for the Aggies, no doubt about it. It is big-time stuff.
Well, if the Orioles do go with a hurler like Lacy here, it would be the 4th time in the last 5 drafts they will have drafted a pitcher in the first round. Cody Sedlock was taken in 2016. D.L. Hall was selected in 2017, 21st overall, and in 2018, the O's went with righty Grayson Rodriguez. Well, Well, this draft will be unlike anything that we have experienced in the past in terms of MLB drafts. There are obstacles facing every front office around baseball, as they've had to scout, evaluate, and dissect draft prospects almost exclusively through electronic means this spring. It's certainly a challenge, but Mike Elias and his front office believe they could draft for the full 40 rounds if they had to.
It's gone very smoothly. Our analytics team did a great job of building a virtual draft board very quickly, and it's really nice. We can drag magnets around. Everyone can see it on their computer screen who has access. It's really easy to use. You can click through and have all of the player info and video that you want right there. And honestly, I think it's something that we're going to keep using. We may be done with physical magnets even when we get back to normal. It has been a little more tiring, I think, for all of us to conduct these meetings over the phone and over video. Usually a draft room, it's a really energetic, fun experience. And we're not getting that this year, which is a shame, but it hasn't stopped us from being productive at all. And I really give a lot of credit to Brad Seelick and the way he's managing these meetings over video and the energy level he's keeping up.
Well, Austin Martin came into the 2020 season as the consensus top middle infield prospect in this draft. But in a season that was just 16 games in length, New Mexico State's Nick Gonzalez made his case to be taken ahead of Martin. Gonzalez is a short but powerful hitter with excellent plate discipline. While the Western Athletic Conference is not exactly the Southeastern Conference, Gonzalez did not play down to the competition. New Mexico State's Nick Gonzalez got just 16 games under his belt in 2020 before the season was cut short. But that was enough of a sample size to determine one thing. Gonzalez was going to rake.
I truly believe he would have hit 30 home runs. And that's getting pitched around. That's hard to do.
The infielder hit almost 450 with a whopping 12 homers in his abbreviated junior season.
He just has unbelievable bat speed, discipline. It's really a total package. It's really special.
His video game-like numbers transformed him from a walk-on to a top draft prospect. Yeah! Detractors point to the high altitude and lower level of competition at New Mexico State. But Gonzalez quieted them with a strong summer in the Cape Cod League.
He's playing against the best guys in the country and putting up the best numbers. Those are the guys that are in the big leagues for a long time.
After manning second base for his first 2 years, Gonzalez was handed a new position in 2020.
One of the shortstops that was competing for the job tweaked his leg a little bit, so we moved Nick over there for a 3-game scrimmage. And I'll be darned if he didn't outplay everyone on the field and make every play a shortstop has to make. It was jaw-dropping.
Even with questions about his long-term defensive fit, Nick Gonzalez is one of the best all-around prospects in the draft. One potential incentive for the Orioles to select Nick Gonzalez: he might cost less than Austin Martin. That could free them up to go over slot with their pick at number 30. Mike Elias and company do have more bonus pool money at their disposal than any other team, almost $14 million to spend on their draft class. And the commissioner has just announced the Orioles' number 2 overall pick, and it is a shocker. Heston Kjerstad taken. He is an outfielder. He bats left-handed. He's 21 years old. One guy that many were not expecting to take, but like Nick Gonzalez, might cost just a little bit less than somebody like an Austin Martin. And let's bring Steve back in here. Steve, we had heard this being rumored that the Orioles might go with a guy that might not be a top guy, a best player available, if you will, but somebody they could save a little bit of money on so that they could go over slot with that number 30 overall pick. Is that what you think they did here by taking Heston Kjerstad?
I would guess so, but we did hear Mike Elias say yesterday if they do use this strategy, they will still be taking their favorite guy. So the possibility exists that they saw him ahead of these other players. Most analysts did not. As you know, Paul, he wasn't ranked anywhere nearly as high as number 2, but an outfielder that showed some pop in his time, a left-handed hitter, and someone that obviously the Orioles are pretty high on making him the pick at number 2. So now that should give him the chance to save a few dollars here to use later in the draft.
Well, Heston Kjerstad is an outfielder from Texas, and of course he went to the University of Arkansas. He is a very talented hitter. The question is he quite the hitter that an Austin Martin is? Austin Martin, of course, hit .368 in his time at Vanderbilt. Kjerstad hit in the 330s. Do you think he has maybe the same high ceiling that an Austin Martin might have, or do you think maybe defensive factors could have come into play, considering there were some concerns about Austin Martin's arm and where he would play at the next level?
It could have been. I mean, maybe signability factored in here, because Austin Martin is represented by Scott Boras. Maybe that factored in. It's to some degree here, and maybe the dollars just didn't make sense to the Orioles. One big difference between these two players is contact rate, and the how do you pronounce the Arkansas outfitter? Kjerstad. He has struck out much more than Austin Martin. So I think that is a bit of a concern here. If you look at it for the Orioles, his contact rate is not nearly as good as Austin Martin, but some of the other numbers, you said the power numbers are there. So this is a real surprise. The Orioles have pretty much pulled a shocker here at number 2.
He hit 37 homers in his 2+ seasons at the University of Arkansas. He walked 54 times, and his final batting average in those 2+ seasons was .343. Steve, do you think it makes sense at least that the Orioles took a position player here, considering how deep they are in their farm system in terms of arm talent?
Well, it's interesting because, yes, they passed on Austin Martin. They passed on Asa Lacy, too. They could have gone for the top pitcher in the draft. But one thing about, if you look at these top 3 picks as a grouping, 2, 30, and 39, it was said that the draft is so rich in pitching prospects that you'd feel really good about a pitcher you could get in the 30s and maybe less good about a position player in the 30s. The depth wasn't the same there. So potentially we're going to see 1 or 2 pitchers taken here as they move on.
Yeah, let's take some comments as well, as people are still reacting. Jason Smith says he understands why the pick is being made to save some money, go with more money over slot later, and potentially go over slot at 30 or 39 and go for a pitcher there. Some more comments coming in as we are live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere. Some people are asking, who is Heston Kjerstad? Because he was not a prospect that got a whole lot of attention coming into this draft. Of course, Austin Martin tended to get the bulk of the attention when it came to the Orioles. And even a guy like Zach Fien, who is a high school outfielder, some might have thought might have been the first outfielder off the board. But Mike Elias told reporters via a Zoom call on Monday that college guys might be used in the later rounds because of the lack of information being shared about those high school guys, just because they didn't have a full season in their age 18 season for a lot of these seniors. So let's roll the clip of Mike Elias discussing when those college players could go and the run on college guys that we could see over the next couple rounds.
I don't think that would necessarily apply to the first round because the first round players, even the high school ones, there's a lot more comfort and track record laid down over a couple of years, and I think teams are confident to rely on that work with those players. I do think that, and this is just my opinion, some people have the opposite opinion, but that we may see a higher or a gravitation towards college players in the later rounds of this draft, just by the nature of it and also with the smaller bonus pools. But we'll see.
If you're just joining us, a shocker with the number 2 overall pick by the Baltimore Orioles. Mike Elias and company go with University of Arkansas outfielder Heston Kjerstad over some of the other top prospects that were being discussed at that spot. So where does Heston Kjerstad go from here after being taken with that number 2 overall pick? I'm sure he wasn't surprised to go that high. Adley Rutschman was taken, of course, with the number 1 overall pick last year. And earlier today, I had a chance to catch up with Adley, discuss how he's spending this time, and he gave a little bit of advice for Heston Kjerstad being taken with the number 2 pick. Now we're joined by last year's number 1 overall pick, Adley Rutschman, who joins us via Zoom. Adley, thanks so much for hopping on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So at this point last year, you were taken number 1 overall by the Baltimore Orioles. Are you getting any flashbacks today to your experience last year?
Oh, absolutely. It's tough to forget all the emotions and the memories that came with that day. And I'm just excited to see just a new group come through and get what, everything that they've had to go through this year has been so tough. And so it's going to be cool to watch them, have some excitement and just, see all the guys, get excited with their family and friends.
Last year, you were surrounded by your family and friends watching the draft as you were taken number 1 overall. I'm sure that our interview on MASN All Access live was the best part of the night for you, I'm positive. But other than that, what was your favorite part of the experience last year for you?
I think everything leading up to that moment, all the phone calls, just the anticipation, the not knowing, and then, having it worked out the way it did, it just, it all came together. And it's one of those things you can, never forget. And you're never going to get that same rush of emotion, and there's nothing quite like it. So I'm just excited to see everyone.
And the guy who could be taken number 1 overall, Spencer Torkelson, you played against him, Pac-12 teams, Oregon State and Arizona State. What do you remember about playing against him and the kind of guy and player he is?
Well, I much preferred playing with him on Team USA than I did playing against him at ASU. So I've been texting him today, and we've been sharing some texts. But he's a phenomenal player, phenomenal person. I wish him all the best, and obviously, if we were fortunate enough to get him, then that'd be awesome. But he's a great player, and I'm just excited to see what he has in store.
What, in terms of plans, do you have for tonight for watching the draft with your family? You're 3 hours behind, so it'll be a little bit earlier in the afternoon, but do you have some plans?
I think I'm just going to watch with my family. And, we got some players that we know, and I think that makes it so much, better to watch. And I think just having those guys, being able to root them on, it's a different, aspect than last year, but it's going to be just as exciting.
What other guys besides Torkelson, any Oregon State players that you're watching for in particular tonight or tomorrow in the rest of the draft?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty with this year, just not having played a season. So, you might have some sleeper picks that go in different spots, and, teams see different things in different guys. So it's going to be cool to watch. I've been catching a high school guy from the area, Mick Abel, and I'm excited to see what he has in store because he's a electric arm, and it's just going to be fun because there's not a lot of people know what's going to happen today, and so there's going to be a lot of uncertainty going in, and that's what makes it even that much better.
So it's been a year now since you were taken number 1 overall. What kind of advice would you give to the guy who's going to be taken number 2 overall and enter the Orioles organization in this year's draft?
I think the best advice I've ever gotten on it, and I tried to emulate this as much as I could last year, was just enjoy every single second of it. Enjoy the process, enjoy the ride. There's not a lot that's in your control at this point. You got people helping you out, and people who are behind you, and it's all going to work out. And what's meant to be is meant to be, and you just got to sit back and enjoy the ride. So that's it.
It's great advice, and I'm sure you have a fewer nerves than you did at this point last year in terms of watching the draft, but we'll be watching it with you. Adley Rutschman joining us here on MASN All Access. Thanks so much, Adley.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well, that guy, Adley Rutschman, certainly drew the most headlines of the Orioles 2019 draft class, but Mike Elias made several other picks who have already had an impact on the Orioles organization. Gunnar Henderson, Kyle Stowers, Zach Watson, and Joey Ortiz were next off the board for the O's. Henderson finished the 2019 season with the Gulf Coast Orioles. Stowers and Ortiz finished with the Ironbirds, and Watson got the call up to Delmarva by season's end. The O's also took Toby Welk in the 21st round, who impressed in Aberdeen and made his way up to the Shorebirds. So again, a shocker with that number 2 overall pick by the Baltimore Orioles. Heston Kierstad out of the University of Arkansas, an outfielder, a left-handed hitter. Some think he could be the best left-handed hitter in this draft class. Let's take a look at his stats overall in 2+ seasons at the University of Arkansas. The average is outstanding as well as the power. 343 total in 150 games, 37 bombs, 129 RBIs, and OPS over 1. And in the 16 games he got to play in 2020, he was hitting over 480. Obviously small sample size, but he was out to a tremendous start. Questions might be where he fits into the Orioles' long-term picture. considering they are deep in terms of outfield prospects at the moment. But Heston Kjerstad, nonetheless, that didn't stop Mike Elias and the front office from taking him with the number 2 overall pick. We're taking your comments as well on all of our social channels as we get ready, as we break down, this number 2 overall pick. Heston Kjerstad going to the Orioles with that number 2 pick. Jeff Peterson says, great pick, left-handed power hitter. Maybe made for the warehouse. Certainly that is what the Orioles are hoping, that Heston Kjerstad makes his way up to Baltimore at some point. Could be a fast riser considering he spent 2+ years at the University of Arkansas and he is 21 years old. So he could make his way up to Baltimore, be hitting home runs onto Utah Street with that left-handed power, something the Orioles have not had a whole lot of recently as well. There is still some surprise in our comments that Austin Martin was, of course, not the number 2 overall pick. Hit .368 with Vanderbilt in 2+ seasons, but the Orioles still going with Heston Kjerstad, and they have an opportunity now to use potentially some money that they might have saved by not taking Austin Martin, by going over slot with the number 30 and number 39 picks as we get later on into this draft. Let's take a look at some of those options with that number 30 pick, and let's look at some pitchers because the Orioles could go over slot and could add some pitchers potentially back-to-back with 30 and 39. First up is Tanner Burns from Auburn. Then you got Bobby Miller from Louisville. Nick Lofton, he's a shortstop from Baylor. Justin Foscue from Mississippi State. Chris McMahon, one of 2 University of Miami guys who could go in this first round potentially. And then Carmen Majinski from South Carolina. So the Orioles going with Heston Kjerstad, the outfielder. Let's bring Steve Molesky back into this to continue to break this down because I'm sure Orioles fans still have some justifiable questions considering we hadn't heard Kjerstad's name. But Steve, do you think this sets the Orioles up to go over slot at 30? And do you think if they don't go over slot at 30, it will be a little bit of a disappointment?
It might be. And, Paul, they could go over slot anywhere in the draft. So if there's savings on this pick, which it seems like there certainly will be, that could be used at 30, 39. That could be used in their last pick, which is number 133 overall. So there are a lot of ways to make that work. They could spread it over multiple picks. So we're going to have to see the overall strategy and how this fit into it. I mean, one thing about this guy, you talked about the big-time power. The video shows us he's got a really high leg kick, which may not play in the pros. You always worry about velocity with a player with a really high leg kick. But, I mean, the Orioles have obviously done their homework. The college guys, they get a lot of data and analytics, and they crunch those numbers. And clearly they've seen some things they like in this guy to take him number 2, as tonight he became the 3rd highest draft pick in Baltimore Oriole history.
And there were some more surprises in that top 5 as it continues to roll out in the MLB Draft. The Marlins not going with any of the consensus top 5 guys, but instead going with a pitcher, Max Meyer from the University of Minnesota. So there are surprises all abound. And Steve, it just goes to show at the end of the day, we don't know anything until the picks are actually made. Let's jump ahead about 48 hours to when this draft ends. Do you think the Orioles have a solid case to make as they try to recruit some of these undrafted free agents? They can only pay $20,000 rather for each of these guys. But do you think, considering they're in the midst of this rebuild and these guys might get an opportunity faster than others, that the Orioles have a solid case for some of these undrafted guys?
Well, that's one they will be selling. And Mike Elias definitely said this will be essentially, Paul, recruiting, because all these teams are going to want a lot of guys, and we'll see how many choose to take the 20,000 or wait for next year, which will be a very, heavy glutted draft of talent. So maybe some players will want to get into pro ball, even if there isn't minor leagues this year. They'll be ready to go in spring training. And so the Orioles are going to make sales pitches to these guys, written proposals. They have some video. They're going to tell these players they believe they're now on the cutting edge of player development with technology, with some young up-and-coming coaches who bridge the gap between on the field, the data, the analytics, the computers, all of that. And so that's the pitch they're going to make to try to get some players for $20,000. And no doubt, Paul, some team or teams are going to find some decent major leaguers after this draft, undrafted players this year.
And of course, you'll have complete coverage of that, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us here from the MASN newsroom on our live show here on draft night. Day 1, still have pick number 30 to be made, and you've got some writing and some tweeting to do, so we'll let you go. But Steve, thanks so much for joining us here.
You got it, Paul.
So that just about wraps up our coverage of the number 2 overall pick by the Baltimore Orioles. Again, Heston Kjerstad, bit of a shocker going to the Orioles out of the University of Arkansas. But don't forget, the Orioles are not yet done tonight. They are on the clock again at number 30. So stay locked into MASN Orioles social feeds all night long. And, of course, as the draft resumes tomorrow, 6 total picks for the Baltimore Orioles. We'll have complete coverage on our social feeds as well as MASNsports.com. Before we get out of here, I just want to say thank you to Hannah Broder, Bobby Blanco, Brendan Mortensen, Steve Molesky, Adley Rutschman, Drexel Wright, Amy Jennings, and Spiro Alafasos for all their help in tonight's show. And, of course, tonight's show was sponsored by Royal Farms. Something new is landing at Royal Farms on July 1st. We'll leave you, before we get out of here, with a clip of Heston Kjerstad and the moment he got his name called, number 2 overall to the Baltimore Orioles in the MLB Draft.
With the second pick of the 2020 MLB Draft, the Baltimore Orioles select Heston Kjerstad, an outfielder from the University of Arkansas.